Hi everyone, we will be presenting on AB 392, also known as the Deadly Force Law. My name is Leona.
I'm Veronica.
I'm Jitsita.
And I'm Dominique.
So we're going to start off with what is deadly force. So sometimes referred to as lethal force, it is a force committed by a law enforcement agent that could potentially cause serious bodily injury or even death. So an example includes use of a deadly weapon to subdue a perpetrator of a criminal act. And using deadly force must be justified and only can be used in extreme conditions if other lesser means of force are inadequate and cannot be used. So when can police officers use deadly force? Under FBI statute, police officers can use deadly force under these circumstances, such as self-defense or serious offenses against others. If it becomes necessary to use a firearm, the following precautions should be taken, such as a warning should be given before a shot is fired. How prevalent is the use of deadly force? So in 2019 alone, 810 people have been shot and killed by the police. And as you can see on the graph, each orange dot indicates the location of a deadly shooting that happened this year. And it is estimated that Black men between the ages of 25 to 29 have a 1 in 1,000 risk of being killed by police officers over the course of their lifetime. Again, in this graph, you can see that African American males are at a much higher rate of being killed by the police compared to other ethnicities. And so this puts death by police force as a leading cause of death for men of color or Black men in the United States. And Black men in the United States are 2.5 times more likely to be killed by police than compared to white males. And Black women are 1.4 times more likely to be killed compared to white women. So what causes officers to use deadly force? Under current policy, police officers can use deadly force when an officer reasonably believes that a perpetrator poses a significant threat of serious bodily harm or death to themselves or others. However, in the US, officers can use deadly force regardless of whether it is necessary to prevent death or serious bodily harm. And even when alternative methods can be used, such as verbal warnings, repositionings, and calling for backup, officers can still choose to use deadly force. So some consequences of using deadly force. The negative ones can be that police officers are rarely prosecuted for shootings, and if they are charged, they often are not convicted. So low conviction and incarceration rates can feed into the idea that police can get away with using deadly force without any repercussions, which can lead to a lot of people having little to no trust in law enforcement. But some positive consequences have occurred, such as it creates a greater public consciousness surrounding law enforcement and the unnecessary use of deadly force. And it has sparked a lot of movements and a lot of protests, one being the Black Lives Matter movement.
This bill, which was introduced in February of 2019 and later chaptered in August, revises key language of California's original code of 1872 pertaining to the use of deadly force by peace officers. This legislature intends for peace officers to use deadly force only when necessary in the defense of human life. However, it is mentioned that deadly force may not be used if a person appears to be in danger or a threat to themselves. Prior to using deadly force, officers must evaluate each situation's particular circumstances, and officers must use other available resources and techniques such as warnings and non-lethal measures, as long as it's reasonably safe and feasible to an officer. Here are a few key revisions which state exact instances where deadly force may be entailed. So to apprehend a fleeing person for any felony that threatened or resulted in death or serious bodily injury to another person. Also, peace officers must only use deadly force only when necessary in the defense of human life, and if they believe that a person will cause death to another if they are not immediately apprehended. Another reason may be that deadly force may not be used in instances of resisting arrest, and the authority to use physical force shall be exercised judiciously and with the respect for human rights and dignity, and the force that's being used must be consistent with law and agency policies.
So now we're going to evaluate the policy. In order to evaluate this policy, we need to look at what the overall goals are and then see if they are being addressed in a successful manner. AB 392 was made in response to the large amounts of police brutality. Officers are using force when it is not necessary, often resulting in a large injury and/or death. These deaths also have a racial tie-in, addressing the racism that connects to police force response. The new bill rewords its predecessor, saying that officers should only use lethal force when necessary, and that they can only act in a reasonable manner with criteria such as if another officer would also respond in a similar manner. If there is excessive force used, a court of law will determine if it was necessary and just. So there are some goals. There's going to be two that we're looking at to see if this policy actually addresses those. The first goal is effectively provide clarity for officers on when to use lethal force, and the second is to help address the racial profiling that causes death in minority communities. Although it does add a little bit more accountability after the fact, allowing officers to be reviewed by a court of law for their actions, it does not give clarity to officers on when they can use deadly force. It adds more pressure to officers who are acting in the moment in situations that most people would not encounter in their lifetimes. The issue is that the fear and threat that they may feel may derive from a preconception about the people they are apprehending. It does not address the racism that officers may have in their background, and it does not give a solution on how we can bring about a better diversity training. It is a step forward, but the issue itself has a long way to go.
So for the carrying over what Dominique said, the supporting viewpoints of AB 392 is that it is a step towards change on police brutality, because it would make it easier to file criminal charges against officers who use lethal force. And then for the opposing viewpoints, many of the law officers stated that this creates an impossible standard, results in a loss of life, discourages proactive policing. And due to the opposition of AB 392, Senator Caballero created Senate Bill 230 to help protect the viewpoints of the law officers. So for lobbying, companies and interest groups spent about $86 million in support of AB 392. And the top three spenders were Chevron, which spent about $2 million, oil companies such as Western State Petroleum Association, which also spent about $2 million, and utility companies such as Edison International spent about $670,000.
So we asked two community activists, which are pictured here, of San Diego's District 4 about their thoughts surrounding the deadly force bill, AB 392, and how this change may affect the members of their specific community. They began by expressing that this change of wording was well overdue, as the people were disgusted with not only the tremendous amounts of unnecessary bloodshed, but also the lack of justice and police accountability. The two explained that their history of police encounters, and they detailed instances where they felt that they were treated inhumanely, which resulted in them feeling helpless and frustrated. They also mentioned that the next step would be spreading the word, as many people have no idea that this change has happened, and they expressed that we now have a written right to live. We also must police the police, they stated, and these specific guidelines would do just that.
We also interviewed two officers because we wanted to get a well-rounded perspective. The officers said that they explained when interviewing the two officers, they said AB 392 is scary because it adds even more scrutiny to actions that is instinctual. The quote is, "You are taught to evaluate the risks, then act. When you perceive a threat, it is more of an instinct when acting." The officers said that they could see how training could help officers understand how to use less lethal options more often, but they thought that racism portion should be addressed. One of the best ways to confront and debunk biases is to interact with the very people you have prejudged.
So that's the conclusion of our presentation. Thank you.